Welcome back to the Tifo Football Podcast. There's no Alex, there's no Joe, but we are going to be talking to Kat Law and Martin Cloake, co-chairs of the Tottenham Hotspur Supporters Trust. And we'll be talking about pay-per-view. For those of you who don't know, or who perhaps live outside the UK, the Premier League's broadcasters in England have created a facility whereby games that wouldn't normally be on television are now available for purchase on a one-off basis for £14.95, which, as you can imagine, has upset a lot of people. Hard times in England, Scotland, Wales, and likely to get harder. And this feels very much like one of those moments where football's being a little bit tone deaf. So Martin and Kat are going to talk to us about that. And, well, you might not enjoy the conversation, but it's an important one. And, at the least it's some sort of insight into the inner workings of a trust during an unusual but, important situation. Let's go to you guys individually and find out how much you actually pay to watch football, because I think that's the crux of the argument. And for the people that for the people that are listening from overseas and you don't quite understand the sort of the British TV dynamic, that might be a good starting point. So, Kat, what are you subscribing to at the moment?
I subscribe to Sky.
Okay.
So obviously, I have, well, not obviously, but I have my broadband and my phone line with them as well. So I'm going to take that expense and put that somewhere else. But in terms of the basic Sky package and then the football and the sport that I subscribe to, it's about £53 a month.
Okay.
For Sky. If I wanted to put BT Sport on top of that, it's about an extra 25 quid. Then obviously when Tottenham were in the qualifiers for the Europa League, we had to subscribe to a very professional outfit called Premier Sport. When they managed to actually televise any of the match, which wasn't that often, that was costing us £10 a month. So that was on top of that. And then I also pay the $7.99 a month for Amazon Prime, for our documentaries and any games that might be on that channel. And then on top of all that, I obviously pay £1,000 a year to Tottenham for a season ticket. Woohoo!
Okay, so we'll call that, because the Premier TV was a sort of a temporary thing, we'll call that 80 quid just for TV each month.
Very generous.
Martin, what are you weighing in with TV-wise at the moment?
It's about the same. My Sky bill monthly is about 60 quid a month. And I mean, I haven't got an outside TV aerial, so all of my TV comes via cable. And there are other parts of the package that I subscribe to. So they would no doubt argue that, the sport is I think it's about £20-25 worth of that. But I wouldn't be able to access that price without the rest of the package. So that's 60. And then I've got a broadband contract with BT. And my BT bill for my landline, my broadband, and my sport is about £70 a month. The sport end of that is about £11. So yeah, it's again that the actual package prices, for what you're paying for the sport seems to be very reasonable, but you need to have the rest of the package to be able to access those prices. So again, it's interesting. Then of course, I've got the same thing for. Paying to actually go to the games, and it's just under £1,000 for my season ticket. But of course, when you go to a game, there are other costs involved with that as well. Then you add the cost of going to away games on, and it adds up to quite a lot of money over the year.
Yeah, this is the thing, because obviously a lot of people have been very, very upset about the £14.95 charge. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that I haven't paid it and I will never pay it. I don't, even if it's Tottenham going or not. I mean, I think what's difficult for people to grasp, and this comes up time and time again, is people who watch the Premier League from different countries. They're staggered by how much people are asked to pay. Before we get on to your role as a trust, what was your response, what was your reaction as supporters to that? Because first and foremost, we're all here because we're fans, not because, that's the starting point. How did you feel, Kat, when you heard about that number?
The £14.95. Well, obviously we've been instrumental in leading and pushing a campaign that was called #LetUsWatch, which was done under the umbrella of the Football Supporters Association. And that was when it became very apparent that the televised agreement under Project Restart where all of those games were free to air wasn't going to continue for the 2020-21 season. So we'd been instrumental in negotiating with our clubs and with the Premier League and with the broadcasters for the right for match-going fans to actually be able to watch those games that were taking place behind closed doors. So that had been something that we cared very deeply about. So we were delighted in September when, with a bit of lobbying from the government and for the MPs as well, the Premier League did announce that they would televise the matches that weren't selected within the traditional broadcast picks by BT Sport and Sky, no additional charge for September. But then obviously they announced this move at £14.95 for October. It was another classic of football kind of grasping defeat from the jaws of victory. So we should have been celebrating that we'd actually managed to get these games on TV, and it was a victory for fans, that the clubs and the broadcasters and the Premier League had realised how intrinsic it was being a supporter to be able to watch your team. That sounds basic, but believe it or not, we had to drum that point home. It was incredibly disappointing that we then didn't have any dialogue, no input into that price point, how that was arrived at. We're obviously in touch with the broadcasters and the Premier Leagues and the clubs, and we are on a constant basis. And you would think that they may well have just stress tested that price sensitivity with fan reps, core audience, end users, consumers, which is all of us wrapped up in one. We would have been able to tell them straight off that £14.95 was not going to fly. It's an incredible amount of money for a one-off stream. So that was my reaction.
Martin, for those who don't quite understand it, can you explain to me and to us how this price was actually arrived at, what the dynamic is for this kind of decision to be made?
That's a really interesting question, and it's one that we've asked. And the official answer from the clubs is that it's not to do with us. It's all down to the broadcasters. And the official answer from the broadcasters is it's not to do with us. It's all down to the clubs. And then occasionally you'll throw in the fact that, well, it's actually really down to the Premier League. And we'll say, well, the Premier League is the 20 clubs, isn't it? So it's really the club. Oh, no, it's not the clubs. So what we've managed to find out, because what we're interested in is a solution, and what the people that are running the broadcast companies and football clubs are interested in is blaming each other. So it's a great partnership, and those meetings must be really good when they get together. But it would seem that the Premier League, you have to go back to some numbers here, that there's 380 Premier League games every season. And the existing deals that Sky, BT Sport and Amazon Prime now have got mean that 220 of those are broadcast. So that means that 160 games weren't going to be televised at all. We've now got a situation where in the UK, certainly fans aren't allowed into sporting events. You can't get into a Premier League stadium to see a Premier League match. So the Let Us Watch campaign that Kat referred to earlier said that, in the midst of a national crisis, when the government itself has mentioned that one of the things that can get morale up is people watching football, insert obvious joke about how bad my team is here, of course, we needed to find a way to make sure that people could see all of their games, because fans were being locked out of the game. We also said that what you could potentially do there is open up to a new audience, because obviously we were talking about, the fans that would usually go to games wouldn't be able to get in. But those 160 games that weren't going to be televised at all wouldn't have been seen by anybody. So there's potentially, there's a new market there. And it was amazing that actually when we were pushing that, and Kat was at the meetings, you might want to expand on it a bit later, that the Premier League, so this is the people who run elite football in this country, were really surprised at the strength of feeling from fans who wanted to see their teams. Imagine, that must have really blindsided them, wasn't it? That, that fans would want to see their team. They would want to see the product that the Premier League tell us that they're great at selling. But what the Premier League said to the broadcasters was that, well, we need to find a way to show this under 160 games. So the broadcasters, as far as we can gather, went away and they said, well, it's going to cost us this amount of money to broadcast those games, the infrastructure, if you like, so the cameras and the broadcast costs and all the rest of it. There's also going to be the mechanics of taking the payment as well, which is going to cost a bit. And let's not forget that it wasn't that they had to take cameras into these stadiums that wouldn't have been there and make a broadcast that wasn't being broadcast, because these games have been broadcast outside the UK anyway. I think one of the big things that the Let Us Watch campaign had talked about was that the only people that couldn't watch Premier League games were fans in North Korea, Saudi Arabia because of the beIN Sport thing and the UK and England. The broadcasters were told to come up with a package. So they said, this is what it's going to cost us. And obviously they would have built in a little bit of tuck for them to make something on top, a bit of margin as well. That's the way business operates. The Premier League would then have said to them, okay, well, obviously we need to make a little bit of money out of this as well because it's our product. And that's how the price would have been arrived at. Now, we've had to deduce that from what we found out, and we haven't been given the numbers. But until anybody wants to tell us any differently and sit down with us properly, then that's what we're going to say. That's the best guess that we've got about how that was put together. Now, the interesting thing about it is that, one, it's a new market. They've talked quite a lot about, benchmarking the event. So they said that, $14.95 for a pay-per-view event isn't all that much. And we've had this argument with them before. We talked to them a few years ago about the pricing of tickets for FA Cup semi-finals or finals. And they said, well, if you look at the price of an FA Cup semi-final ticket and you compare it to a Super Bowl ticket or to a centre court ticket for a final at Wimbledon, it's not really that different, that much of a difference. And we said, but those people haven't been to all of the other games through a whole football season that they need to do to qualify for a ticket to get to that semi-final or final. And in the same way here, we're talking about 5 extra games a week at $14.95. The way that a football audience consumes the product, if you want to put it in those terms, is that it is regularity. So, there isn't an Anthony Joshua boxing match, a world title fight every week. There aren't 5 every week. There's maybe 1 or 2 a season. And at that stage, you might say, well, £14.95 or £25, I think it was, for the last Joshua fight is not that bad. You're talking about £14.95 per game. So that's extra on top of all the other costs in a situation where people are on 80% of their wages. Some people are now facing being on 2/3 of the minimum wage. People are losing their jobs. We've got a massive, massive economic crisis caused by COVID. And as Kat said, that, the first thing we would have said to them if they would have bothered, after being surprised that we actually wanted to watch the game, you'd think they'd say, well, how much might you be prepared to pay for it? It's a personal opinion. I think that if they'd have pitched it at $9.99, most people would have said fair enough. I think if they pitch it at $9.99 now, people will turn to stuff it. So, just from a basic marketing point of view, it's a complete cock-up.
I think what surprises me is the false equivalency argument doesn't surprise me because I've heard it so many times. I think it's the amount of how often I hear football, and by football, inverted commas, I mean the Premier League, the club, governing bodies, say, leak it to the press that they've been stunned by the reaction to something or taken aback by the response to. And it seems to me, Kat, that the obvious answer to that is to consult people first. As Martin has just said, why would you, having dealt with you guys over the summer with the kind of the comeback and the dynamic they used there, why would you not say what would be fair? Why would you not come to supporters organisations first?
Absolutely no idea. That's a very quick answer, isn't it? I think, look, we've always tried to be constructive. We've always tried to, as Martin alluded to, focus on the solution, focus on the outcome. We'll always try and be constructive and pragmatic. We're not going to go into the room with the PL or with the broadcasters and, slap our fists on the table or whatever. We'll always look at the wider ramifications and where we want to get to. And in this case, that's obviously a far fairer deal for fans. I don't think that there's anything more that we could do from our point of view to show good faith and goodwill from our side of the relationship. They have all our details. We are in touch with them. They know where we are. We can't keep saying, guys, hey, you should have spoken to us. All we can hope is that there is so much bad press on this that they learn their lesson and they talk to us in future. I mean, I've been involved in the trust movement for 7 years now, and it's a constant battle to be inside the room having the conversation. You are constantly having to prove that you have something to bring to the table, that you have the knowledge, that you have the insight, that you're not there just to leak stuff that's confidential or to create issues for them, that you can actually work towards a better solution for all parties and all stakeholders. That's quite exhausting. It's an absolute no-brainer that you would go to your fan groups and say, okay, you wanted this. Here's what we're putting on offer. What are the obvious pitfalls? How do you think we could make the all-round package more attractive? Could we offer a discount code for season ticket holders? Could we absorb part of this into our ordinary subscriptions? What would you want as a consumer? What would make this fly? Would it be a $9.99 price point? Do you think we could get away with $10.99 if we threw this in? Look, we're here and this is what we do, and why people won't consult with us, you'd have to ask them. We're very readily available, and it's our job to do this kind of thing and to put forward the fan view and to use all of our experiences to, fan feeling and the mood out there. And we're constantly taking temperature checks. So we have a fairly good grasp as to what's happening within our own fan base, and through our connections with the FSA and their national network, we understand the reaction on a national level. So if I were them, I'd definitely be talking to me. There you go.
As well as saying that they're surprised by the reaction, they then say, oh, well, you don't understand. We say, oh, well, explain to us then. Because how are we going to understand if you're not talking to us? And a lot of the time you'll get a kind of political line or a lot of marketing flim-flam. And again, one of the regular complaints that we put up is that I'm not sure if you need to go back and find a dictionary and look at the definition of consultation, because consultation doesn't mean telling somebody why you're going to do something and then going on and doing it. It means explaining why you need to do something and getting some agreement, and actually working out what the problems would be with that. That we all do it. We don't expect thanks for this, but anybody who's involved in the supporter movement does it on top of a job, or it's voluntary. None of this stuff, it's not our job. Okay, so people are prepared to put in quite a lot of brain power and quite a lot of time to make something that they care about work better, and that offer isn't taken up, and it's just nonsense on a basic human level as well as nonsense on a business level.
With this issue specifically, I mean, that seems particularly hard-headed, because this issue is affecting different parts of the country differently. Like, unfortunately, as we're seeing, different parts of the UK are being locked down. Some have barely come out of lockdown even now before they go back into it. You have to have a bit of a wry smile at the decision to, one of the first games, for those who don't know, one of the first games to be on pay-per-view television last weekend, was Burnley's game. And Burnley's in a part of England which has been particularly hard hit by what's going on at the moment. The economic repercussions are, well, we won't know what those are for a very long time, but there's no awareness. There's not even that kind of synthetic PR awareness that companies show just to kind of to curry favor with people. It's astonishing. And that is, imagine the luxury of being able to talk to an individual body that represents an entire fan base, an entire club, or in some cases, by proxy, an entire region, because that's a facility that exists to broadcasters, to the Premier League, to Premier League teams. You can communicate that way. It's not, trying to gauge public opinion is not as difficult as trying to straw poll, footfall as it walks past on the high street. You have these options available and they still don't get taken up. Let's talk about your mechanics of the trust. What kind of, I think I know the answer to this, Kat. What kind of response have you received from the fan base? Because obviously we're only a couple of months removed from the furloughing situation, which I think on behalf of all of us who are connected with Tottenham, I think you guys did an amazing job with that. And it was, it was very necessary. So you're only a couple of months removed from that. What was it like this time round? What have you heard from supporters?
So obviously, as I alluded to earlier, we are connected into a national network. So we're in a constant dialogue with all our peer trusts and with other fan groups up and down the country and with national organisations and with our club and with the Premier League, etc. We're on social media. We've been going to Spurs for decades between us, myself and Martin. So we have tentacles in the fan base into a lot of different demographics there. We also have an online forum for our members. We have a very active inbox at the trust. And, in the olden days, people would come up and talk to us. So we're fairly good at taking a gauge of the mood and of taking a temperature check and getting a fairly instant reaction. On this one, once it was announced, I used Twitter and put out a very quick poll to ask what people's feelings were around the price point. 50% thought it should be free. That's fine. That's up to them. Personally, I think that's kind of idealistic because at the end of all this, the clubs will have lost about £1 billion between next March. And I would be a hypocrite because in the meetings with the Premier League, I have said to them, if the price is accessible, then I think that fans will be willing to pay a small amount for this. A small amount isn't £15, by the way. But anyway, the concept, 50% would like it free, whatever. 35% were prepared to pay around a fiver. That gives you a good indication. 12% around a tenner, and the rest, tiny proportion, were prepared to pay the £14.95. So that was kind of an instant straw poll. And then last week we did another poll, which was asking people what their plans were for the first Tottenham pay-per-view game, which is at home to Brighton and Hove Albion on the 1st of November. So we've got a little bit of time on this. They've selected their pay-per-view games for 3 match rounds, and we're at the end of that. So basically, there's a little bit of time before our fans need to decide what they're going to do on that, but we thought we'd ask what their plans were thereof. No surprise, 71% had said that they'd watch it on an illegal stream. 19% weren't going to watch it at all. 6% were planning on going off to the pub. And only 4% of over 4,000 respondents in just 2 hours were planning on paying the £14.95. So they're 2 fairly good, gauges and dipsticks as to what the fan feeling is. We've obviously had discussion on our forum. We've had discussion, as I said, people emailing us in, discussion on our social media channels. It's not just Spurs fans who feel quite strongly about this. And in fact, this is one of these cases where it's picking up pace. So every day that passes, there's more bad press on it. There's more media on it. There are more and more fan groups who are either calling for a boycott or calling for money to be donated to charities. Local food banks are the big winners in this at the moment. There's thousands of pounds going into local food banks, which is not a bad thing, I will say. Very much needed as well. And this isn't going away. So bad news for the broadcasters and the Premier League is that fan feeling on this, people are really digging their heels in. They're really angry. And across our Premier League network, every single fan group is at a level of angry, either from very cross to absolutely fuming. So there's just somewhere on that barometer. Nobody is okay with this. So that's the fan mood at the moment, and I can't see that going away.
I think it also represents like another layer of another way in which sort of another failure to recognize the sort of the mood in the room, because 2 problems, and both fairly obvious ones. If you make it too expensive, you make something that's too expensive, inevitably people gather to watch games with their friends. They go to pubs. They start doing things like ignoring social distancing rules and government guidelines, whatever the hell those are at the moment, frankly. The second thing is that the Premier League for a long time has waged war against illegal streaming. I mean, the issue in Saudi Arabia is based around piracy. And there are a few other issues involved there too, but primarily it's piracy. And so this was an opportunity to attack that market and to defeat it, because if the price had been something like $4.99, I'm trying to think, because obviously this isn't unprecedented in the sense we used to have Premier League Plus a long time ago, and I was trying to find out today what the pricing for that was, and I think it was about sort of $7.99, £8. I'm happy to be corrected on that, but this was such an easy way to kill so many birds with one stone, to be a kind of, to show yourself, to understand what's happening in the country. And to give a little bit back, because I think as a fan, I think the thing that chips away at my morale is not stupid stuff like Spurs not being able to defend set pieces or silly things happening like throwing away leads or anything like that. It's this broader sense that the game always has its hand out. Always. There is never. Do you remember when you used to go to the fair? And there were those rides which used to shake you upside down so that all the change fell out of your pockets. That's football. That's football. It just makes
it's a good analogy.
But it sickens me. It makes you feel like you're being processed. And as soon as you haven't got any money, and in this situation it's literal, because if you can't afford to pay for the pay-per-view, and you don't have access to, well, you don't have any other legal access to footage, then you are quite literally being locked out of the sport. The sport has no use for you because you've got no money left. And I think increasingly with the kind of the depression felt in this country at the moment, that's kind of the way we're going with the sport. Right, let me calm myself down. Martin, and this is a kind of a general point as well, because you've this isn't the only time that the trust will be invaluable, but when supportive feeling percolates through to you, when you've taken the temperature of the fan base, what are your next moves as a trust?
Kat's kind of covered how we kind of try and take the mood, and I think that there's a combination of having to. There's lots of different views out there, and if we're going to be honest, we'll get we get a lot of backing from people, but there's always going to be somebody who disagrees with us, and there's always going to be a few people who really disagree with us over something. And there are people out there who think that 1495 is fair enough, and what's the fuss about as well. We would be stupid to take a position on something if we didn't have a good idea that quite a lot of people backed it as well, because then it would just be us as individuals shouting our mouths off, and it wouldn't mean anything. It wouldn't represent anybody. But equally, sometimes you've got to take a bit of a leadership position, and I think that again, it's not boasting. It's a fact that both of us have been involved in the supporter movement for quite a long time now, and you get to know generally, what fans like and what they don't. So the general feeling amongst most British football fans, and certainly fans of English football, is that the pyramid is in general a good thing, and people like to get success based on merit. Okay, that's a general feeling. So in terms of where we go next, I think it's trying to kind of respond to the various things that are coming up, and have that combination of making sure that we've still got a fairly good handle on what people are thinking, but also kind of taking that position and sometimes arguing a point and taking a leadership position. And I think that's going to become more challenging as more proposals like European Super Leagues, for example, or breakaway deals are talked about, because at some stage people are going to say, well, in the end, I might like this kind of idealistic view that, we're all in it together, but in the end, I want my club to do really well. And I think our argument would be that, we don't personally, and I don't personally certainly agree with this argument that's being put forward at the moment, that people pay to watch some teams, but they don't pay to watch other teams. We know that the so-called Big Six have got a bigger global audience, but people pay to watch those teams in a competition that means something. There's no point watching something where you know who's going to win, and there's concerns over competitive balance already. So in terms of where we go, I think that a lot of what's happened under lockdown has been exactly what you just said, Seb, that there's that kind of distance between the game and the people who put the money into it and the people who make the business what it is. It's not just a transactional thing. People invest a lot of emotion into the game as well, and that's why it's a successful business that it is. And I think that it's trying to engage with some of those more complex arguments, if you like, trying to do get some more success in what we've been talking about, which is that let's have some genuine dialogue, let's have some genuine consultation about where the game wants to go. Because with everything that's been happening over the last few weeks, the obvious question is, has anybody asked the fans what they want? And it isn't good enough for the clubs to say, oh well, you just don't understand, or whatever. I think one of the biggest problems, and I think absolutely the reason why we need an independent regulator in English football, we need something that is responsible for maintaining competitive integrity, is because in some ways you can say that the people who run the clubs, you can't really blame them, because what they are, that the system as it exists at the moment says you've got to make sure that your club does well at the expense of every other competitor. It's like a business. You've got to drive everybody else out of business. And so if you're then the last man standing, there's not a competition. There's not a product to sell, is there? There isn't anything to watch. So in some ways, it's kind of how do we save the game from itself? How do we save the club from itself? The shorter term answer to that is that, we need a solution for making sure that people can watch games at an accessible price point. We need a solution for when, and let's hope we get to a stage when, there's some progress made in fighting the virus and the rates start going down, and some people can go back into stadiums, but other people who are shielding, for example, can't go back in. We want to make sure that they're not forgotten. They've still got access to games as well. There'll be lots of, conversation about how do we get fans back safely into stadium. So there's a lot of practical detail that needs to be worked out there. Probably, two of the things that have been said most often during this whole crisis are an observation about the game being tone deaf. And also, there's this phrase optics. The optics don't look good now. That's become very popular, isn't it, as well? But I'm not sure if football knows or cares how bad it looks to its own customers and to other people. Football is asking the government for help at the moment. If you're a politician, football's not going to be top of your list of kind of vote-winning things to help out, is it, as well? So it's just trying to knock some sense into people and saying that you need to work with other people. You can't just do this on your own. And unfortunately, too many people in football are too full of their own self-importance.
I think that "you just don't understand" line is probably the most antagonizing of them all, because firstly, it's incredibly arrogant. Secondly, and it's very best, what it demonstrates is that football is really, really hopeless at explaining itself. I'd actually go a little bit further and say that there are so many times where football doesn't think it has to explain itself, and then it will kind of turn around and use that its opaque processes against the supporters at when it's convenient. It just drives me absolutely crazy. Kat, in the kind of the micro sense, what is the trust path of recourse in this situation? Where do you go to? Who do you communicate with when you have fans knocking on your door, on Martin's door, saying,
"Yeah, sure,
this is this is not for me. This is not my game. I can't afford this." Where do you go after that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going back to your previous question to Martin, how we progress an issue as a trust. Basically, as co-chairs of the organisation, it would normally be myself and Martin who would propose a position to our board. There are 10 people who are elected onto our board, so to the other 8 board members, and we'd then have a discussion about that position and about what was the right position to take and weigh up the pros and cons, and then whatever that board decision was, we then adopt that position. That would be on the back of discussion with our members, who were fully accountable to, whether that's on our forum or through surveys or whatever else, and blah, blah, blah. And at that point, we then advance, which now comes into your other question. So we have spent many years developing relationships. We can't explain how important it is. No club is an island, and no fan group is an island neither. So we are very fortunate now, through our own hard work and through the national setup also, that we do have an ability. We have an ongoing dialogue with Tottenham Hotspur Football Club for all those domestic and local issues. That's with departmental heads right across the spectrum. So that will be in ticketing or in safety and security, or in fan relationship management, or in whatever. So catering, etc. So all your kind of departmental heads were on regular weekly dialogue, if not daily dialogue with. And we also have an into the executive board level. So we speak to the actual people who set the policy at Tottenham Hotspur as well. And we have set piece meetings with them 3 or 4 times a year, but we are in dialogue with them on issues like, I don't know, Project Big Picture or PPV. We'll obviously make contact with them and have dialogue with them around those issues as and when the need arises. So we do have avenues and doors open to us to advance issues, either on behalf of individual fans. So we take an awful lot of casework for individual fans who may find themselves in trouble for behavioural matters or ticketing matters at games, or just have an issue that they need to advance. We'll facilitate that dialogue, and we'll make sure that they are in touch with the right person at the club to help them resolve that, and we'll oversee that process with them. So that would be on an individual level. On something that's a campaign issue, we would then obviously lobby the club formally. So we'd set out our position and we'd set out our asks of them, and we'd try and open a constructive dialogue to understand why they've adopted a certain position. If it isn't in line with ours, there may be bits of the jigsaw that we're not privy to, and it really is in their interest to educate us in that sense, and make sure that we do have we're fully aware of all the facts, so we can make a judgment call. If it's then something that's a national issue, we'll lobby our club. We will then obviously also go into the Premier League. I'm again fortunate. I sit on National Council for the Football Supporters Association, and I was a fan representative on the Football Association Council, on FA Council. So it's the value of relationships and building networks. So I would advance either with the Premier League or with the FA, depending on what the issue was. So we've got a channel through there as well. And then obviously through the Football Supporters Association, you have connections to every fan group in the country and in Europe through Football Supporters Europe. We are also very fortunate to have built some good relationships with some very intelligent, empathetic, bright, smart journalists. I don't know who we could be talking about, but we have, who are more than willing to listen to the fan point of view, who were very lucky they give us a platform to advance our thoughts and issues that we think that are important. Look, the sexy stuff happens on pitch. Most fans just want to go to a game and watch their team, and that's all they're interested in. The pint of the price of a pint of Amstel might be a small issue, but generally 99.9% of your football fans just want to watch their team. This other stuff is stuff that weirdos do. So me and Martin are on the weirdo scale. But the fact that people like yourselves give us a platform to talk about this other stuff, which is so important. Being able to afford to go to a game, being able to get to a game, being able to see your team, be given a voice in how your club is run is massively important. So this is a long-winded way of saying thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk about this today.
It's the only reason I invited you on is just for the ego stroke, really. I just end the podcast now. We're kind of done. What I say, I've kind of moved away from match reporting the last few months, and probably what will go down as being my last game was Spurs Champions League match in Leipzig. What a glorious night that was. But something struck me about that, which it feels like it's pertinent to this situation. I was walking around Leipzig in the hours before the game and afterwards, and the atmosphere outside that ground versus the average atmosphere and the way supporters are treated outside grounds in England was a real contrast. And it kind of harks back to this issue. And Martin, I'm gonna pass this to you to see what you think about it. But it harks back to this issue. It's been around for a really long time, in that football fans aren't really treated like people. On the one hand, they're expected to dig very, very deep into their pockets. On the other, if they don't want to, it doesn't really matter because they're just a kind of homogenous mass of nobodies anyway. And there's that kind of malignancy in this movement as well. It's like $14.95 is a lot of money, but ultimately $14.95 is a negotiation between different people in that room when that decision was made. And there was someone in that room that probably wanted 25, 20, 18, something like that. I just feel like, well, this is what we can get away with. And I feel like it's just such a... I don't even know what I'm saying. I think I'm just having a bit of a rant, Martin. So just start talking over me. And you're an idealist. Go on, off you go.
Well, blimey, that's a big one, How long have you got? I think, the reason that I got involved in doing this was that, I've been a trade unionist for most of my life. I believe that people should have a voice at every level. I think that the people supposedly at the bottom contribute to what happens at the top as well, if you want to put it like that. So I suppose I'm an activist, if you like. I stayed out of a lot of things around that with football because football was what I did on my time off. But it's something that I love, and I do still think it's the people's game. And I think I'm actually reading Julie Welsh's book at the moment about being the first woman football reporter on Fleet Street. And she comes up with there's a great phrase in there where she described a stadium as being a repository of people's memories that stay there like a watermark. And I thought that was a wonderful way of describing it. And I've always said this, that unfortunately or not, we have to recognise that football is a business, and it's quite a big business now, but it is a business like no other because of those emotional attachments that people have got. So, as somebody, I started going to matches in the late 70s and I was going to games through the 80s. And so I was there when things were very different inside grounds. And I was also there when fans started organising themselves a bit and they started publishing fanzines and they started saying, well, actually, we've got different opinions and different things were going on. And I think, it might be a bit of a cliche, but the thing that then massively influenced me, and I always think back to it, was Hillsborough. I was at a game, I was at Plough Lane that day watching Spurs play Wimbledon, and we'd heard that there'd been a riot at the game and some fans had been killed. That's what was announced over the tannoy at half time. And it wasn't until I got home and I saw what happened there. And I mean, a lot of Spurs fans will tell the story that it could have been them in the semi-final in 1981 against Wolves that was played at Hillsborough. There was a crush there. But, the thing that struck me about Hillsborough was that the fans who were being crushed at the front of that stand up against barriers were pleading with the police and the stewards to let them on the pitch, and they wouldn't do it because they'd be conditioned to see them as a threat. And that was like the point, I started writing then more for fanzines and getting a bit involved in what was then the Tottenham Independent Supporters Association, because it was more serious than just, they should be treating us a bit better. People are dying because they've been dehumanized. And it doesn't just happen in football, it happens in other places. And it's probably kind of made this, quite dark and quite major. But you asked the question. So it's that important. It is life or death sometimes as well for people to be treated properly. So a lot of it's about economic exploitation, but it's also about treating people as human beings. And we often say that the game recognises the transactional nature, but it hasn't got any human empathy as well. And I think it's important to keep that. I think there's an interesting discussion about Germany. I don't think personally that the German model is as perfect as a lot of people hold it up to, but I think there is a lot to learn from Germany. I think there is a very, very different fan culture there, and I really admire what a lot of their fans have done. It's different here, and I think, again, recognising the kind of organic differences are really important. I then got involved in the trust and in its incarnation because I had been involved in various organised sort of spurts of fan behaviour, I suppose, for years, and I'd written a lot. And I had a lot to say for myself as a journalist, and I started writing about football as well. And I've always thought, talking is easy, but actually getting on and doing things is probably a bit more useful as well. And that's why I do what I do. And I think there are a lot of people, some of them are the journalists that Kat talked about, and it isn't just about stroking ego, but it is incredibly useful having in the media people that understand, because again, a lot of the reason why a lot of us started writing fanzines in the 70s and 80s was because the fans' view wasn't reflected. The journalists hated us as much as the police and the people that ran the clubs. We were treated with absolute contempt. And so in the media now there is an understanding of the fan point of view, and that's really good. There are a lot of really, really smart people that are involved at different levels who have got different priorities throughout the supporters movement at different clubs as well. There are people involved in the national side of it, and also at clubs and in the game there are a lot of really good people who really want this to work in the way that we all do. That cliche about it being the people's game, yes, it's a cliche, but this was the reason that football is the draw that it is in this country is because it was something that was created by us. And yes, it's gone a long way from that now, but the value of it is still there. That's why we spend so much time talking about it and arguing about it as well. And I mean, I've often had the joke, I spent far too much of my time, wasting my life sitting in pubs talking about football, but it is a fantastic thing. At its best, it is brilliant. It brings people together, and it is about more than just what happens on the pitch, but that's always the centre of it as well. And it's the thing that always gets me is the sport not realising, its true value. It's more than recognising the price of everything and the value of nothing. It actually doesn't really understand why it is so valuable, and that's the great pity. And you've got so many people out there that care about it and that want it to be what it could be. And it's if that goes, then maybe it is time to look for something else. But there's enough of that there to still make it worth trying to fight for it, I guess.
Well, let's end on a human level, though, because I think that's important. I mean, you've talked about people a lot there, Martin, and that's the thing that strikes a chord with me, the game's failure to recognise that these are people. Kat, right at the beginning, you talked about sort of pointing people towards food banks and some of the local charitable organisations. There are a lot of people suffering in England, up and down the country. Would you be able to tell me a little bit about who you guys are sort of pointing people towards at the moment?
Yes, of course. So basically, we've just asked our fans to consider whether or not they want to pay the £14.95 on the 1st of November. And if they don't, then the Tottenham Food Bank would be incredibly grateful for their support. It's a shocking, I think it's doubled, the number of clients needing the food bank's doubled since March. Actually, that's not that surprising, but it still shocked me. And the number of people donating has also declined because people can't get to the shops as much because, we're stuck indoors and shielding and lockdown and whatever else. So basically, in a nutshell, they could really do with your help. So if you'd like to support them, then you absolutely can. If you bear with me, I will get you all the details.
Absolutely.
As to how you can do that. But yes, I mean, in the meantime, if you want to go onto our Twitter feed, we put out a post yesterday, which linked to a little statement and gave you all the details as to how to connect with the Tottenham Food Bank. But they'd be most grateful.
Well, Kat's looking for that. I mean, I think
fill for me quickly.
you know, we've got our game isn't sort of 1st of November, so you know, we didn't go out as soon as some of the other supporters groups did, in terms of, you know, well, you know, here's an option that, you know, you can give your fee to the food bank or anyone else, and again, that's partly a response to a lot of the fans that got in touch with us. But you know, I think what is pretty evident is that, you know, pay-per-view or not pay-per-view, there is an absolute need to support the food bank, you know, and quite a lot of other charities as well. But, you know, food, you know, the debates going on in Parliament today, that, you know, the Marcus Rashford initiative as well, we're trying to, you know, we're in a developed nation apparently, and we can't put food on the table. So this has kind of gone beyond football in a way, but it's such a basic thing. And it's like, I think we'd say to people, you know, aside from whatever happens with PPV and how it goes for the rest of the season, what is really evident now is that people have got to be giving whatever they can to make sure that people around in the areas around their football clubs, in the areas around where they live. And actually, if you don't give it to the Tottenham Food Bank and you live somewhere else, but you're a Tottenham fan, you know, give that money, make that contribution to where it can count. You know, it doesn't matter, but this is such a basic thing. People have not got food to put on the table, and it is, I'm afraid, going to get worse over the next 6 months.
So the Tottenham Food Bank, justgiving.com/crowdfunding/Tottenham-Food Bank. So justgiving.com/crowdfunding/Tottenham-Food Bank. So that's where you can make a donation, and you can also donate £3, £5, £10 or £20 straight to the food bank by texting Tottenham 3, Tottenham 5, Tottenham 10 or Tottenham 20 to 70085. 70085. So that's the Tottenham Food Bank. But as Martin quite rightly pointed out, if you're a Tottenham fan but live somewhere else and would rather support a local one, then please do. You know, there's no hierarchy here. All your money would be very gratefully received by any food bank.
Just another quick one. If people want to go onto our website at thstofficial.com, one of the other charities we support, a local charity, is a charity called the Studio 306 Collective. They deal with people who have kind of had mental health issues at different stages of their life. There's a little bit of rehabilitation work that goes on there. It's a community initiative. Again, people are under tremendous mental pressures at the moment, and the work that charities like Studio 306 do, you know, largely goes under the radar. You know, they haven't got big marketing budgets. A lot of people don't know about them. We've tried to kind of push the work that they do. If people want to find out about them, they can find it on our website. And again,
I've got their website,
we know we're asking people for a lot, but if there's anything that you can do, please think about that as well.
And they are at www.studio306.co.uk.
Perfect. It's a perfect place to end, really. I think this is just my opinion. I'm not in the business of trying to shame anybody that's watching games by pay-per-view or anybody who can afford to buy those individual fixtures. But it's a time for compassion, and it's a time to think about priorities and do have a look at those organisations. I mean, there's many of them around the country, and yeah, they're all far more important than football. And ultimately, this is kind of really what football's supposed to be about, community. So please do take a moment to think about some of the things. Guys, thank you so much for coming in. It's a work night. We're working from home anyway, so it doesn't make as much difference. But it's a Wednesday, and you know, we're all pretty tired. But thank you so much for giving it your time.
Thanks for asking us on. Always a pleasure.